Good morning. Those of you who are in the back signing up, there'll be plenty of time after the session here. Come on up and take a seat and we'll get started. Thanks for coming today to join us in this congressional update. Everybody's heard Jim Hackett talk passionately about politics and what it means to our industry. Regulation and laws are probably the second most important risk we have in our business beyond commodity pricing, and so it's important that we pay attention to it. The past 18 months related to the Macondo issue, and we saw the regulation, the moratoriums, and the impact on our Gulf of Mexico drilling program is just one evidence of that, much less the attack on hydraulic fracturing now. So we see that those issues are important to everything we do. Greg Pennsylvania, who's going to be here and maybe leading, there he is right here, talk about Q&A. He leads our government relations team up in D.C. and across the United States. He's very active, continually discusses our issues with congressmen like Mr. Brady and others around the United States, and making sure our issues are known to each of them as they develop laws that affect us. We're also really active in trade associations. American Natural Gas Association, which you've seen on Insider, American Petroleum Institute, who have the Lady in Black ads, as well as the IPAA and several others are out there for our causes and trying to educate not just the lawmakers, but grassroots individuals so they can influence lawmakers. And that point is the one I wanted to make for you, is you are as important, if not more important, in our efforts than anything the executive management team does or Greg Pennsylvania and his government relations team. You are the voters. You influence your representatives and your senators, and we need you to continue to do that. And do that with your neighbors and those you come in contact so that they know what the issues are that are important to this industry and important to Houston and the nation. Delighted to welcome one of our best leaders who is also an advocate for the energy industry. Kevin Brady is our congressman. He lives here in the Woodlands. He's been a member of the House of Representatives since 1997. He's risen to great influence within the House. He's vice chairman and top Republican on the Joint Economic Committee. He's a senior member of the House Ways and Means Committee, and for those of you who hadn't remembered that from civil class in high school, that's really one of the top committees and a plum assignment in the House of Representatives. They really impact budgets, taxes, and other things. So it's an important business function within the House. Needless to say, Kevin's been very supportive of our industry and very supportive of Anadarko, and we thank him for that. With that, I'm going to introduce Kevin Brady and welcome him to give us some comments and then have some Q&A. Kevin, thanks.
Bobby. Very much. Thank you.
You turned it. Yep. Okay, great.
Bobby, thank you very much for having me here today. Greg, thank you for the work you do for Anadarko and for energy up in Washington. Appreciate all your work, Ways and Means on energy issues. And thank you for being here today. We do a lot of town hall meetings. One of the best decisions my wife and I made was to not move to Washington. We live here in the Woodlands. We have a third grader at Sally K. Ride. We have a seventh grader at Knox. I can just tell you, walking into a junior high school still makes me nervous, as an adult. It's a tough time. And I commute to work each week, and we do that, one, to stay out of the bubble in Washington. Secondly, we want to raise our kids here in this community. We want them to have that hospitality and attitude of Texas. But it also allows me to keep closer to my customers, which happen to be my employers. That's you. We do a lot of town hall meetings, telephone town hall meetings. We do a lot of roundtables within businesses because my experience is you can't be an expert on everything. And my pet peeve is people in public office think they always have to be on transmit. They should be on receive. They should be listening a whole lot more. So with your permission, let me do a quick sort of update, about 12, 14 minutes update, and then we're going to open it up for questions on this. And just so you know, I see neighbors here. Lori, Mr. Gary, thank you. My Boy Scout leaders here. We spoke to a Boy Scout group the other day who asked about commuting back and forth to Washington, and we figured out for the troop that my flying back and forth over the years, I finished 3 round trips to the moon. I'm on my 4th. in commuting, but the payoff is we get to live here, and we get to work for the neighbors in this room. And so thank you for giving me that privilege. Let's talk about what's going on in Washington real quickly. Biggest issues today, clearly, the federal debt, and we're in a real crisis there now in the economy. So many of our young Americans believe America's growing debt is a threat to national security. In fact, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff believes the greatest threat to our security is our growing debt as a country, because it's going to squeeze out resources for every other part of the budget if we don't get a handle on it soon. In the economy, 80% of Americans believe this economy remains in recession, and about the same amount believe that we're going to stay in these doldrums going forward. And clearly, we're not in the position we need to be in the economy. America, in Americans, we are genetically disposed to bouncing back from tough times. No country does it like we do, but not this time. It's not happening. We're going to talk a little about that. This is not my favorite chart, but probably the most revealing chart we have in this presentation about where we're headed as a country. The red area, of course, is our growing debt as a nation. The green area is our revenue. And starting with the revenue, you can tell, with except for some spikes and valleys and good times and some tough recessions, for the most part, the green area stays the same. As a country, we devote about 19% of our revenue to fund our federal government. No matter how you adjust it over time, it always works out that way. And as you can see here, we can never generate enough taxes to cover all the spending that this country has put in place. The red area is the spending, the debt of our nation going forward, and it looks huge. We're really at the beginning of this high curve right there. And to put it in human terms, because we have a baby born today in South Montgomery County, Texas, their share of the federal debt is already $46,000. In effect, a baby born today at the local hospital owes Uncle Sam a new Lexus. By the time they're 13 years old, if we don't change our ways in the federal government, they'll owe Uncle Sam a second Lexus. And by the time they're 22, they finish college, they're ready to start their career and their life, they'll owe Uncle Sam a third Lexus. Now, the good news is young people don't buy luxury sedans for the federal government, but they pay the price a different way. They pay it in a more sluggish economy. They pay it in higher taxes and in higher interest rates. So a young person who's starting their life will see fewer opportunities for jobs, and when they get that job, they'll have fewer money in their pocket to pursue their own dreams. So all that red ink has a real price to pay on our kids and our grandkids going forward. And as you can tell by this chart, when people say, look, we just need to increase taxes, that'll solve the problem, clearly we could double everyone's taxes in this room. We could double everyone's taxes in America today, and the country would still be running a deficit. The spending is that far out of whack. We don't have a revenue problem in Washington. We have a real spending problem in Washington. Here is the budget. And I always put in this pie chart because it just helps, just as you know in your home and here at Anadarko what you bring in and then how you spend it. This is how Washington spends your money. The yellow part of the pie chart, defense, is a major part of it, and it is because for many of us, we believe, and I believe, my number one constitutional responsibility to you is to keep this nation safe and the families within it. When I take that oath of office, that's what I'm thinking of. And so I'm strongly pro-defense, and it is a big part of our budget. Pentagon wastes too much money, by the way, and we can find savings in there, but it's a number one priority for us. The green pie chart is non-defense spending. That piece of the puzzle is what most of you and I think about government. It's highway funding outside our doors. It's the air traffic controllers at Bush Airport. It's the border security. It's the VA. It's education funding. All that is in that green pie chart. But the yellow and the green are pulled out because that's really what we appropriate each year. That's what we in Congress actually fund and set limits on each year. But the rest of that pie chart is the big part of it. These are important programs: Social Security, Medicare for our elderly, Medicaid for the poor, the interest on what we owe, the other mandatory programs like unemployment, food stamps, And all that area is on autopilot, because the bottom line is, if you qualify for it, you get it. And so we don't even appropriate this for the most part. It just gets spent. But this is the biggest part of our budget pie, and it's the fastest growing. And unless we get a handle on that, we won't see a balanced budget literally in our lifetime. Here's part of our challenge. 3 very important programs, Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare, continue to grow because yesterday, 10,000 seniors signed up for Social Security and Medicare. Today, another 10,000 signed up. Tomorrow, we'll have another 10,000 sign up. And it continues to swell the ranks of those programs, especially Social Security and Medicare. In a few years, every dollar we send to Washington will go to just those 3 programs. In fact, if you added the interest on our debt today, we're actually there. We're actually at that point today where our money, the money coming into Washington, only covers those 3 programs. That's why we believe, and I believe, and I want to ask your thoughts, if we're going to get our financial house in order, we have to find good ways to preserve those programs, but make them sustainable for the long term. Choice of 2 futures are really, we don't have to go down the road to all that red ink. We introduced a budget and passed it through the House earlier this year that changes the course, bends the curve. We call it the path to prosperity because no country with that high a debt has ever been prosperous, and neither will we. The path to prosperity starts to bend the curve. It doesn't do it immediately. I mean, it gets some real cuts right now, but over time what it does is curve us down. And the goal, what I like about the goal of the new budget in the House, is that the goal isn't just to have a balanced budget, it is to pay off our debt. The goal isn't just to stop bleeding, it's to become healthy again as a country and as an economy, which I think ought to exactly be the goal we set. And no one's talked about that for a long time in America, but they ought to be talking about that. The next step, we've got November 14th, the week of that, we have the opportunity in Congress to pass a constitutional amendment to require Congress to balance its budget. We came close about a decade or so ago, passed through the House, missed by 1 vote in the Senate, and I often wonder what would have happened had we passed that and required our country to balance its budget like you do. That other chart might look a lot different today. And we're going to have a chance, you have a chance to weigh in on your lawmakers on whether we have a balanced budget and send it to the states. Secondly, we have an opportunity. I've introduced legislation to put guardrails around the federal government because I know how government spends and I know how the routes they take to get out of discipline. And I'm convinced taxpayers need to discipline their governments at every level, especially in Washington. We're going to talk about that for a second. Path to balanced budget amendment, it's 2 steps. First, Congress has to vote for it. It takes 2/3 vote, 207 in the House, 67 in the Senate. Right now, there are 241 or 2 Republicans in the House, so clearly we'll need 30-some Democrats. It'll have to be a bipartisan vote to send this down to the states. In the Senate, there's 47 Republicans who have agreed to vote for this, so it'll take at least a third of the Democrats in the Senate in order to pass this down to the states. That'll be a challenge. If we can get it to the states, ratification isn't assured either, but it's possible. It takes a 3/4 vote. We need 38 states. As you can tell, the red is Republican, the purple is split, Nebraska is nonpartisan, blue or Democrat controlled. The assumption is Republican-controlled states will pass it fairly quickly, but it would take Republicans, the split states, the nonpartisan state, and 2, I think, Democratic states for that to pass, become part of the Constitution. So it is a challenge, and our founding fathers and mothers made it this way. Difficult to amend the Constitution, but there is that opportunity coming very soon. This MAP Act, the reason I raise this is one of the biggest frustrations we hear back home is that we can't seem to constrain spending in Washington. No matter what you do, they figure out a way to spend more. And history says that's the case. What I did, we wear a couple different hats, Ways and Means and Joint Economic Committee. I had my Joint Economic Committee study all of our global competitors around the world. And I said, look at the countries that have got themselves into deep financial trouble find out how they worked their way out of it, and how when they did it, they grew their economy at the same time. We found 26 instances among 9 of our global competitors who, when they spent less as a federal government and they reduced what they owed, guess what happened to their economy? It took off. Businesses invested in new jobs. Families felt more comfortable that their financial house was order in their country, and they felt comfortable to buy homes and cars and appliances. And then, after that study, I asked them to go out. I said, look at the 50 states who do a better job than we do at controlling spending. Identify the tools they use to control spending. What really works, and ask those governors what they wouldn't do without in order to control spending. And we took the results of those 2 studies and created the MAP Act, Maximizing America's Prosperity. And basically what it does, it shrinks the size of the federal government by a quarter this decade. So we start the process of getting it back in control in a major way. We put guardrails around the government, Congress, and the White House so they can't go outside this path. And the reason that's important is we've seen in the past, when we try to put guardrails around spending, Congress, and the White House, they'll abide by them till it gets too hard. And then one party or the other, or both, will hold hands and they'll jump those guardrails. So we create a bill that creates guardrails high enough and flexible enough they can't do that. The bill also sunsets all these programs that are obsolete that were created 100 years ago but don't deserve our tax dollars today. The programs, as you know, we have some programs. We have 82 separate education training programs that duplicate each other. 47 different job training programs that do the exact same thing. We have 500 different programs to help urban aid major cities. We can't afford that duplication. I guarantee in Anadarko, if you're in a department that duplicates another department, you're probably nervous about your future. But in Washington, we duplicate and duplicate and duplicate, and we can't afford it anymore. So it's time to sunset those. We require honest budgeting by the White House. We put guardrails around the White House, give the president a chance to veto frivolous spending, and then we end forever the threat of government shutdown. I don't know about you, but every year we watch the same dance where it comes to the end of the year, government threatens a shutdown of the federal government. At the end of the day, it gets resolved, and it gets resolved by higher spending. What we do is end that threat forever by creating, in effect, a law that says at the end of each year, if the government gridlocks, it continues. Government spending continues, but it continues at a 10% discount. And so when Congress gridlocks, it's taxpayers who win, not the spenders who win. I think that's important going forward. The reason we do this, look at our history. From 1981, for 2 decades, as we shrunk the size of government from about 22% of our economy to 18% of our economy, guess what happened? We grew 37 million jobs, most of them like yours along Main Street. But since 9/11, since just a dramatic increase the last several years, as government's grown, we've actually got fewer jobs in America, again, fewer along Main Street. I won't go through the reviews of the MAP Act, but it's getting very strong support. President's proposals, he passed a major stimulus 2 years ago. We actually have about 1 million fewer workers today in America than when the stimulus began. We have less consumer confidence, less business confidence, and we're struggling. The President's proposed a second stimulus. It includes a lot of what occurred before, a reduction in your payroll taxes, a little more than what you have today. Education spending, some of that, a small amount, is for rebuilding schools that need reconstruction. Most of that will be sent to the states to fund classrooms and education jobs. Infrastructure spending, passenger rail and transit projects, extending unemployment benefits for another year, about $447 billion. The President has also proposed a lot of new taxes to go with it, and this is where you might want to perk up, because a lot of these taxes land on your company, in your industry, and you, as a matter of fact. The President talks often about taxing millionaires and billionaires, but the tax increases he's proposing are for, in our district, hit a lot of professional families a lot of small businesses, because more than half of all small businesses, they don't file as a corporation for taxes. They file as individuals like you and I. So when you raise taxes on those levels, you raise taxes on our local small businesses. That's a big part of the President's tax increases. There's limits on charitable giving, on their home mortgage deduction for taxpayers in the two highest, what I call the pro-growth tax brackets. And it's frustrating. We've met with a lot of our charitable organization about this portion of the President's tax increase, and their point is clear. Given the choice between our local people giving money to build that new church building, to finish the United Way campaign, to help fund scholarships in the civics clubs, to help recover from an Ike or a Rita or wildfires in Magnolia. Our local organizations say, don't send that money to Washington so that we have to beg to see if we can get it back. Let that charitable donations occur here in our community where people can see the money go to exactly where they want that help to go. That changes this. The next one's double taxation of U.S. global companies directly affect a lot of companies, including Anadarko. Repealing LIFO, taxing U.S. energy companies, those three really go together. It's a lot of new taxes. And here's the premise of it. America has one of the worst tax codes on the planet. In fact, we're the only major country that double taxes our businesses when they compete around the world. We tax them for income here in America. We tax them on the income they earn overseas when they're competing. No one else does this. As a result, our tax code tries to put in some provisions that sort of ease that double taxation so our companies can compete against China, against Europe, against Canada, against the other national energy companies, oil companies around this world. The President feels differently. He wants to remove those provisions, reinstate the double taxation. Taxing U.S. energy companies is going to have a major impact on your bottom line and your ability to explore, because these are what you count on in your unique industry. Some people call them corporate subsidies and loopholes. I can tell you, Washington doesn't write a check to Anadarko at all. Just the opposite. You generate a whole lot of revenues for Uncle Sam. But these tax provisions for energy, many of these have been in the tax code since 1913, since it began, because this is a unique industry. A lot of industries, a lot of different types of companies or professions have this because of the uniqueness of their industry. The tax code sort of deals with that. Removing these provisions drives your taxes up dramatically. And so the real question is for you, Anadarko can have money for taxes, or they can use their money for jobs. I mean, it's a real clear choice. And I think for us, in energy state and energy region, we want those dollars going to new jobs, new exploration, new development, because that's what, frankly, feeds our families. That gives us our dreams. And one example of that, and I won't belabor to the point, but here's an example of what they call a subsidy. 2004, the Ways and Means Committee that I serve on was worried about the number of companies sending workers offshore, making investments elsewhere. So we sort of created in the tax code two tiers. We said if companies invest in jobs here in America, production in America, manufacturing in America, innovation, research and development in America, we'll give you a lower tax rate than if you do all that overseas. So in other words, we encourage you to do that in America. The President's proposal says, yeah, we'll continue to do that except for one industry, energy. With energy, we're going to tax you the same when you produce and create jobs in America as if you do it overseas. So we're going to encourage companies to outsource, do the production somewhere else. Makes no sense in a country like ours that's still so dependent on foreign energy. The study we did, Spend Less, Owe Less, Grow the Economy. I'm going to finish these two charts just because I think this gets to the heart of what we need to get the economy going. This chart, I asked our economists on joining economic committee to go back 40 years. I said, I want you to track government spending in Washington versus job creation along Main Street. I want to know the relationship between higher spending or lower spending in Washington and jobs like yours. Not government jobs, jobs like yours. The blue line is government spending over the past 4 decades. The red line is jobs along Main Street, private sector. As you can tell, not only is there no correlation, it's a negative one. As government grows, jobs along Main Street shrink. And it's been that way for every decade for the past 40 years. But look at this next chart, and this is the final one. I asked them to go back and chart, so what happens though? What's the correlation between business investment and jobs? When businesses invest in new buildings, new equipment, new software, when they put capital to work, what does that do to jobs along Main Street? And you can tell from this chart, it's a one-to-one correlation. When businesses invest in buildings and equipment and software and technology, your jobs grow. And it's been that way for 40 years. So until we get back into that position, we're not going to see the job growth in America. I'm going to stop. I'm going to leave it on the budget right there. Greg, Bobby, with your permission, can we open it up to questions and comments on these issues or anything else?
Thank you, Kevin.
And I just want to answer questions because I was told if I came to Anadarko, they'd all be easy. So I hope that's... Greg, that is true, isn't it?
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah. Sir, yeah, please come on up.
You've very well addressed the spending issues, the growth in debt. I guess another major issue, I think that's a significant drag on the economy, is the cost of federal regulations.
Yes.
I've heard numbers and the total cost in the range of $1.7 to $2 trillion a year. While some of those are probably necessary, I would argue that the great majority are not. So we have deficit spending in Washington that's taking money away from job creation by private companies and individuals. At the same time, we are burdened with all of this additional cost that's actually hampering economic growth, job creation, research development. What is the Republican Party or your colleagues doing to perhaps better address this problem?
You know, we agree with you. I think the overregulation is a major drag. One of the reasons we're having such performance trying to pull ourselves out of these tough economic times. You know, I see the EPA, I've never seen the EPA on steroids like it is today. And it's not just energy, it's all across. In the Interior Department, OSHA, there's not, I was telling your management team, there's not a profession or an industry that comes to my office here in Montgomery County or in Washington where among their top 3 biggest concerns isn't overregulation. And so what Republicans have done is to take the regulations we think are the biggest job killers and try to roll them back. And it's not like we're trying to roll back all regulation. There is a role, but we think there ought to be a balance between whatever that goal is and job creation. We can have cleaner air and cleaner water, and we can still spur jobs at the right time. You just have to find that balance and make sense. There isn't a balance today. So we started with repealing the President's health care plan because that'll cost 800,000 jobs in America, according to the Congressional Budget Office, independent. Huge new regulation on the medical industry. We have voted through the House to repeal EPA regulations and limitations on Gulf access, the moratorium, to speed up permits there, to open up new access, to force them to do lease sales again this year, and trying to push the administration at every step to get us back to our normal permitting process, because it is slow. They're slow walking, it seems, every permit. We're trying to pull back new regulations on boilers, on cement, on agriculture. The list goes on, but the impact is dramatic. I think this year the White House administration is proposing 200 separate regulations, all with impacts of $100 million or more on the economy. That's a huge drag on us. And again, we just want to go back to a reasonable basis for the regulation rather than the over-regulation. So, and I know it's critical to your company. One bill that we're passing here in the next couple weeks is called the REINS Act, R-E-I-N-S, like rein in. And what it does is, what we find is we're always chasing these regulations. They're proposed, they have the effect of law, and Congress has to scramble to try to reverse them and get them through a White House that's proposed the regulations, who vetoes them. And so under this REINS Act, Congress has the opportunity, before a burdensome regulation goes into place, where we have the chance to vote to stop it before it causes the damage. But I'm a supporter of that, co-sponsor of that bill. I think it's a good solution, so we don't have the problem at the get-go. Thanks for the question. I've stunned you into submission already this early.
Kevin, I'll ask you a question.
Yeah.
Where do you see the outcome of the super committee that's been directed to come up with a specific level of spending cuts? And if they don't come up with that level of spending cuts, then we're dealing with some automatic cuts.
Yeah.
Or the president, I guess, doesn't get the money that he needs to budget.
Conventional wisdom is that new super committee, the Deficit Reduction Committee, falls short of the $1.2 trillion they have to come up with, and $1.5 trillion they should come up with. The conventional wisdom is that they fall short of that, and that there are automatic spending cuts in the federal government in defense. Both the yellow chart and the green chart cuts split equally between the two. I'm a little more optimistic. There are some pretty serious lawmakers on that group who've been on the Bowles-Simpson Deficit Reduction Committee, who know, like Dave Camp, my chairman of Ways and Means, understands Social Security, Medicare, taxes in a major way. I also think Democrats will want to step in, or at least the president, because if this group doesn't do their job, we're going to have the debt ceiling fight that we just had occur again in September and October of the election year, right before the president's up for re-election. So I think he's got some skin in the game. My thought is, we're not asking them to do that much. We're asking them to cut up $1.5 trillion over 10 years in a budget that is $3.5 trillion every year. So we're asking them to do, I think, a haircut each year. They won't be easy. These are real cuts. They have real impact. And it shrinks the government over time. But I think they need to do the full 1.5 and more if possible. In fact, I'm going to vote for the highest amount of cuts we can do because of all that red ink. Can I ask you guys about Social Security, Medicare? In Washington, we're told we shouldn't address those because politically they're explosive and you shouldn't deal with it. But it seems to me Social Security is on very shaky ground. We're already borrowing. This year, we will borrow as a country $41 billion from China and Japan and other countries to pay our Social Security benefits to seniors. And if we don't change it, it'll never be balanced. We'll never have enough money. Every year, we'll borrow more and more to pay more and more seniors. And so insolvency is absolute for Social Security. Medicare runs out of money here in about 13 years. Important program for our seniors, but we can't sustain it. There are good options to preserve both those programs, Social Security and Medicare, for every generation, once and for all. But too many people in Washington think we shouldn't tackle those because you might not get reelected. My thought is every year we delay solving those problems, it gets worse. It's just like in your home or in business. You put off a serious problem, the options get worse. The damage gets worse. Tackle it now. And on Social Security, we've got some options. We talked about it at Town Hall here at Anadarko a few years ago. Social Security, we have two big options. We can go mild or spicy for a solution. The mild one is this. If we want to stick with pay-as-you-go, which is one generation, younger generation pays the benefits of their parents and grandparents ahead of them. So you pay and it goes right into the seniors. If we stay with that system, then we have to gradually, over the next 30 to 35 years, gradually raise the age of retirement to 70. And we have to tie the benefits of Social Security to real cost of living, not wages, but cost of living. If we do those two things, we make Social Security, if we stick with the current system, it'll last forever, frankly, without tax increases and payroll tax increases. But there's the bold options, too, and you've read about private accounts, personal accounts. But here's a good example of a bold solution that we know works just down the road. In 1984, Galveston, the county employees and a couple other counties next to them, they opted out of Social Security, and they voted themselves to put their Social Security contribution, same as you and I, they put it in interest-bearing accounts. They didn't gamble it at Wall Street. They didn't take it to Lake Charles and put it on the tables. They bought CDs, interest-bearing accounts. Yeah, safest things around. Well, now, 35 years later, their Social Security benefits are 2.5 times larger than ours. And they own their accounts. Social Security, you and I, we don't own those accounts. They're virtual accounts in our name, backed by virtual assets, whatever the government can put together to pay those benefits when we need them. Galveston has personal accounts. They are owned by them, and they can give them to their heirs, and they generate 2.5 times more because they put the money to work for them. They let it grow for them over time, just like your own retirement account. Seems to me, if we opt to stay mild, we ought to put that solution in place now. But we also ought to look at some of those other options, because I really long for the day where when you retire, instead of going to Uncle Sam or your congressman's office for your retirement, that you take your account down to your financial advisor and decide how you're going to invest it for your retirement. I really long for the day younger people have that type of option. And so I'd like your thoughts on that issue. Is this something Congress ought to keep putting off just because politically it's a little tough? Or Social Security, can I ask a show of hands? Should we tackle Social Security now rather than delay it? Thank you very much. Same with Medicare. I mean, do we keep putting that off, or do we solve that problem? Seems to me, yeah. Thank you. Can I leave now? I feel better about everything. Really. Other issues? Yes, sir. Most of that is payout. The biggest administrative cost is on the disability side. In fact, 2/3 of the administration of Social Security is not sending your parents benefits. It is dealing with those who are disabled in this very long bureaucratic process for determining if someone's too disabled to work or not. That's the biggest administrative drag in Social Security. Thank you. Yes, sir. Yeah. Do we have a couple hours on that one? I think we all know what caused this crisis, and greed was at the basis of it and at every step along the way. I think the solution was another big overreach. I think, in fact, most of the Dodd-Frank regulations end up landing on the community banks and the regional banks who weren't the problem. And the end result, I fear, we're going to see less local lending, and we're going to see higher borrowing costs as a result of it. I will tell you, I get nervous. Whenever the government says they're protecting me as a consumer, I get nervous. Whenever they say they're looking out for my wallet, I hold it right away. And my worry is that we're seeing major overregulation centered around the behavior of some major banks and non-banks, in a system that allowed common sense to go out the window. I think my feeling is we need to repeal Dodd-Frank. We need to go back to the heart of that problem on subprime loans and address that. In part, I'll tell you, part of that law makes some sense. Requiring people, it seems so obvious, but requiring people to have a down payment in a job to get a home loan. I know that's crazy talk, but that's common sense. To ensure that the lender, whoever it is, whether it's a bank or a mortgage company, whatever it is, actually retains part of that loan, rather than passing all of it on, so that they do the due diligence to make sure they get repaid, not just some investors 2 and 3 and 4 times down the security chain. Seems to me to make perfect sense that way. That ought to be obviously part of our answer. And then the final thing is, I think banks and lenders who make these risky decisions ought to pay the price for it. I think we ought to end bailouts forever for those decisions. I think the full weight of those risky decisions ought to land squarely on that institution and that executive or group of executives who made that decision. It shouldn't land on us. And we could probably spend a lot of time talking more about Dodd-Frank and the response, but those are the basic principles. What do you think? Different opinion?
I was thinking that you shouldn't let the banks be so big, because if they become too big to fail, you kind of have to bail them out, otherwise you become faster. Especially so big.
Yeah. One of my worries in Dodd-Frank is that they actually they institutionalize too big to fail. We now have given the Fed and Treasury the ability to step in and undergird those decisions. I think it's the banks have only gotten bigger through this whole process. But it's our community banks that are paying the price. Ask if you're in a small business, if you or your spouse also are in a small business, I don't need to tell you how hard it is to get credit, especially if you have any kind of real estate tied to it. The feds have really made it impossible for anything tied to real estate or commercial real estate. They've overreacted. So Texas, which didn't have a problem, gets treated the same as Florida and Nevada, and that's a mistake. But thanks for raising that issue. It's a major one. Yes, sir.
Congressman, I have a question about self-interest fixing macro issues we face. Because if I hear you talk, I'm receiving Social Security disability, I'm thinking, okay, we have all these big problems over there, but my question to you is, you're going to cut my benefits. So how do we move past the micro to fix the macro?
I think I may be wrong, but I just think people are hungry for truth tellers right now. Just tell us the truth. If this program's in trouble, tell us what it is and give us the options on how you solve it. And let us Americans are pretty, we're awfully flexible. We understand issues. But if the problem's always hidden, which a lot of this has been, they don't make the adjustments. So we already tell people no a lot, and it's no fun doing that. But you look at our future, you look at that chart with that red ink, we don't have a choice. We just don't have a choice. So you just have to tell people the truth. We can't afford that anymore. And we can't. You don't make people happy all the time, but look, the problem has been Washington's been trying to say yes to everybody for far too long. That's the problem. They never say no, never. And so we got to start saying no in a major way. You guys are terrific. Let me finish up. Oh, yes, sir. I'm sorry. Yes, sir. Yeah, they are. Federal employees are now outgaining public sector employees in salary and benefit. It didn't always used to be that way, but it's dramatically increased, and we can't continue it. And the federal government, in study after study, we're one of the few sectors in America that isn't more productive. Like, that's a surprise for anyone in this room or this business. But yeah, every other industry, including yours, the efficiency and productivity has skyrocketed in America, but it hasn't in government. So we do overpay. We have far too big a workforce. I have a bill that shrinks the federal workforce by 10%, and all it does is by attrition. We fill 2 out of every 3 openings in the federal government, and we just shrink it that way. addresses compensation as well. We've got to hold down the cost of our overhead. That's our overhead, you and I, as taxpayers. We're inefficient, we're not productive, and that's why, again, shrinking the size of government this decade by at least a quarter is a good way to get a handle on that. Yes, sir.
Just a quick one on this Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah.
What's your guys' attitude? Have a conversation.
I was going to go be part of the protest this morning instead of coming here, but decided, hang around with you guys. I don't quite understand it, frankly. Between the free college tuition and forgive all our debts policies, I don't understand that in a society that rewards hard work and perseverance in achievement. I do think they're misguided because it seems like one of their overriding principles is equality, equality in compensation, equality in standing, and all that. But in America, what we treasure is equality in opportunity, that everyone gets a chance to show what they can do. And in America, that is the case. I mean, we have so much chance to do and show what we're capable of in this country. And earlier this week, we did a town hall meeting down the road by Greenspoint. After it was over, this gentleman named John, he said he came to America from Pakistan 20-some years ago, had no education to speak of, went to work. He said, only in America, he said, I got an opportunity to show what I could do at every step. He's now the chief compliance officer of this company down the street, sort of lived the American dream. And his point was to the Occupy Wall Street protesters. He said, don't they understand this is America? You've got all the opportunity for equality in the world. This is the only country it occurs. So I just think I don't quite get it. You know what I mean? What do you think? I mean, there's always someone to blame if you're looking to blame someone. And I think it's a mistake for the president or anyone to pit Americans against Americans based on their achievement. I mean, why do we do that? I mean, shouldn't we be rewarding people who work the extra hour or come up with a better solution, figure out a way to solve a problem better than someone else? We need to do more of that, not less of that. So I have a disconnect from those guys, and maybe the light bulb will go on at some point, but it hasn't yet. Yes, ma'am.
I think for me, one of my biggest issues is I don't want to see our side of the aisle come out really strong on any of these points. If we're talking about Social Security, why you probably shouldn't ever bring it up, they said the other side of the aisle says you can't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk about, not funding federal tax dollars for education. If you talk about repealing the voluntary pay, and we never come out with anything good for our side.
Yeah.
If you have the governor saying that Social Security promised he's attacked, and he never comes out and clarifies his message. So why is it that we cannot get our message across?
I think it's not for lack of trying, because and I can tell you on Ways and Means Committee, all the taxes, Social Security, Medicare, energy, we fight that immediately, tooth and nail. I'll just tell you, we don't get a whole lot of coverage. Frankly, this is why we do these. We have to end around Washington in the media at the national level. We have to go around them and get our message out at the local level. It's harder to do. And there's no question, too, you're right, that we need to improve the way we respond to those attacks because they are unfair. It is class warfare. And they delay the solutions we need at the end of the day. So we got to get better at it, no question. Yes, sir.
What do you think, realistically, the chances of a flat tax, no deductions, being one? It's talked about.
Yeah.
Realistically, what do you think? Are we just wasting our breath?
No, you're not. I see you nodding. It's wasting your breath. I don't think so. I think we can take a first step on the effort we're making now, which is to to do away with exemptions and a lot of the complexity and dial the rate down, so we have perhaps a top rate of 25% or thereabouts. The next obvious step is to go to a flat tax, of 17% or some figure like that. I think the worse and worse the code has become, the more uncompetitive we are as a nation, and just people are fed up with it. I think we have an opportunity. It's going to be hard because when you do that, you lessen the influence of Washington. In Ways and Means, we do all the tax reform. I long for the day we push those decisions out of my committee. And I still think at the end of the day, a flat tax would certainly be an improvement over what we have today, a scary code that's so complex that anyone can get caught in it. A flat tax would be better. I still think if we really want to reform the tax code in a way that I think grows our economy and creates fairness to it all, I like a national retail sales tax. I love the thought of the income of the IRS being completely and totally out of your life and out of business's life. I think it's fair. I think it's easier to collect. And I think it would give us a strong economic boost. That's the real ultra spicy option on tax relief. But at some point, I'd sure like us to take a hard look at it. What do you think? What would you like to see? Flat tax?
I think less complexity.
Yeah, I do too. Yes, sir.
I think we got time for one last question.
Okay, right behind you there. Man, that hurt. Did you really have to say that last part? I got it. Okay.
So I don't see how that's very fair.
Yeah.
By pushing the burden on people, starting families and aren't being paid.
My thought is on the fair tax because there is a rebate to it. So you cover all the sales taxes for people, everyone in America up to the poverty level, including younger people just starting out. And the thought, too, is that the complexity of the code adds so much to the price of every product. Between 20 and 23% of every product is tied into the accounting, the payroll taxes, all that went to comply with the tax code, the ability to pull that back out and pay the real price. We can have a lot of discussion on fair tax, but I do think in a society where fully now, today, 51% of Americans don't pay any federal income taxes. They pay payroll taxes for sure, Medicare and Social Security, definitely. But as far as carrying the load of that chart, we have fewer and fewer people carrying more and more of this government, and you can't keep doing that. So, at some point you kill the golden goose, and that's the direction we're headed. So we have to do tax reform. I'm hopeful from our committee sooner rather than later. Look, you have busy days. Let me finish with this, and I'll be glad to stay, and we'll tap your question, okay? Let me tell you about two people I've met fairly recently that sort of maybe give us hope on where we ought to go as a country. Are you aware of these Texas honor flights where the community comes together and takes the World War II veterans up to Washington to see the memorial that's dedicated and built for them? It's important because there's 1,000 or was 1,000 of those World War II veterans dying each and every day. Well, a school teacher in Montgomery, Texas, decided we were going to do one for Texas here in Montgomery County, and she got her school children, her class students involved in fundraising, spread the local Rotary and Lions Club, the community outside. They've now done 5 honor flights, and each one is the same. They meet up at the Target parking lot in Conroe at 4 in the morning in the dark. They have the buses there. Every World War II veteran has a young escort to go with them that day. It's a long day. The community's there to send them off. The Patriot Guard motorcycle riders take them down to Bush Airport. They fly to Washington. They go to the monument. They lay a wreath at the Texas column. They see some other monuments, reconnect, and then they fly home that same day. It is a long day, and they oftentimes don't get back here till 2 in the morning. On every flight back, the same thing happens. All those young escorts sleeping. All those veterans chattering away, talking to each other. They tell us this is one of the best days of their life. Well, each of these honor flights, I help with others, providing breakfast, sort of the send-off. Every one of these, I meet a hero or two. The last, 5th and final flight, as the buses were getting ready to board, these 2 young women came up and said, "Can we introduce you to your dad? To our dad, we think he's a real hero." I said, "Sure." And so I met their dad, Billy Trio, Mr. Billy Trio of Trinity, Texas. Turns out Billy Trio was the youngest serving Marine in World War II. He enlisted when he was 13 years old. He fought his first battle and was slightly wounded in Guadalcanal at 14 years old. 2 more battles. In the Battle of Saipan, was injured, seriously wounded, spent 8 months in a hospital recovering, finished his full tour of duty for America 2 weeks shy of his 17th birthday. I got to go up to Trinity. In fact, I'm headed up there next today. But I got to go up to Trinity, to the VFW, and present to Billy Trio the Purple Heart he earned at the Battle of Saipan. And me, his neighbors, his family, his veterans in this Legion Hall, we're all in awe of Billy Trio. And he doesn't think he's a hero at all. He said that's just what Americans do. Same time I was meeting Billy Trio, I met Sergeant Eddie Wright from Willis, Texas. You may have heard of Eddie. In 2004, a rocket-propelled grenade hit his vehicle, tore off both of his arms here at the elbows, tore a big hole in his left leg. He's bleeding out. He still gets help, calls in help for a unit. They all survive. He decides he won't be a victim, becomes a hand-to-hand combat instructor for the Marines. He's now out of it. A year or so ago, we were at a reception at the Woodlands Conference Center. The community had come together to build Eddie Wright a home designed around his injuries so he could live a full life. And a room about a fourth this size, and the community's raised money. It's helping a hero. It's just a great foundation. And Eddie Wright takes a microphone in his prosthesis, and he says, among his remarks, he said, from time to time, people will actually ask you, if you could go back that day, avoid that RPG, if you could have your life and body together, wouldn't that be great? And his answer always is, absolutely not. He said, the generosity of the American people, how they treat me. He said, the freedoms here. He said, I now know more about the freedoms I was fighting for than when I was fighting for them. And the reason I like to remind people of Billy Trio and Sergeant Eddie Wright is that if you're looking for the greatness of America in the size of its government, you'll always be disappointed. It's just not there. If you're looking for the greatness of America in its people, in our neighbors, in our communities, you'll rarely be disappointed. We need to stop looking to Washington for the solutions for everything in America. We need to start looking among our community, among our innovation, among our entrepreneurship. That's where the real solutions are. So anyway, thank you very much for having me here today. I appreciate it.